Well, hello, everybody. I'm Kim Dupre. I have been asked by some of the folks over in Waupaca to give them some assistance since I live over here on the western side of Wisconsin, Minnesota, St. Croix River Valley area. And we've had a lot of experience with digesters over in St. Croix County in Wisconsin, very western edge of the state. And through that experience, I have met my friend Bud here, who is a retired United States, I should say, Fish and Wildlife employee. And he helped us a lot with the New Richmond digester proposal and thought he had some good things to offer for the rest of you. So,
Okay, thanks, Kim. Well, to start, let me say that I have a considerable amount of material here to cover in considerable detail. So I will be referring to prepared notes. Some of the information to be presented requires very specific wording to ensure technical accuracy. So it was necessary to write that material in advance of this.
So how or why are you involved in this manure proposal, or are you a paid consultant or something?
Well, I'll answer the last question first. No, I am not a paid consultant. I do not stand to benefit in any way, shape, or form for what I'm doing here. I'm basically involved because you asked me to be involved.
Well,
So,
I know your experience, Bud. We've gotten acquainted over the last several months, I guess. So tell me a little bit about the proposal for a minute. What do you think of this one in Waupaca as compared to maybe New Richmond or whatever else you know?
well, there's a lot of similarities in a general way, between what I'm seeing in Waupaca, Lynn Township, and New Richmond, in that basically the proposals are pretty vague. They're pretty open-ended. They really lack the detail that one would need for an in-depth analysis.
Mhm.
And that's pretty much the way it goes with these big companies. When I was working for the Bureau of Land Management, we wrote a considerable number of environmental impact statements based on the need for a project to receive a federal permit. It might be a permit to cross BLM lands with transmission lines, or a pipeline, or construction of a coal power plant, a variety of things. And to get additional information, or to get a necessary degree of information from a company so you could actually do an analysis, was like pulling hen's teeth. They just do not want to define what they're going to do. And of course, from a company perspective, that's perfectly reasonable. If I don't tell you what I want to do, you can't call me to account later for not doing what I said I would do. So naturally, they want maximum flexibility and as little responsibility as possible.
Absolutely. So,
So, so that's kind of my thoughts on this proposal.
all right. So let's talk about the probable effect on the Walla Walla Creek with DNR's called it now an industrial waste effluent. So what are your thoughts about that?
Well, yeah. Well, let's look at the discharge. We know that the discharge is going to be warm water. It's going to be the temperature on the discharge is going to be warm, much warmer than the water in the Walla Walla Creek would be. So that certainly goes down on the blackboard as a negative. Uh, they're going to be adding nutrients, phosphorus, nitrogen, into the creek. What I would expect there is that is going to equal an expected increase in filamentous algae growth. Probably another negative, without a doubt. Now, this algae, the reason that can be a problem is it'll grow over the rocks and the rubble, and it can smother the habitat for aquatic insect larvae, which are an important source of trout food. So the creek is probably going to lose some of its sensitive clean water species of macroinvertebrates like stoneflies, mayflies, some of the caddisflies. That's the fourth negative, I guess. I think that we will see an increase probably in tolerant species, such as oligochaetes, or they're going by their more common name, sludge worms. I don't think that's a positive either. I think that racks up as another negative. Also, I think we can expect that the algae would smother the spawning habitat for trout. Another negative, and given that there's going to be chemicals, who knows what, in the discharge water, there's also the issue that it's going to be toxic to sensitive invertebrates such as your stoneflies and your mayflies, and also probably your fish fry, your small trout. If they do hatch, they're more sensitive than are the adult trout. So overall, I see it as a negative for Walla Walla Creek. I certainly don't see anything that's going to benefit any of the trout or the aquatic ecosystem in any way. It reminds me very much of an example of a project I worked on in Missouri when I was a fishery biologist down there working for the Fisheries Research Lab. We were doing research studies to determine the effects of various types of pollution on aquatic macroinvertebrates as an indication of what the effect was of these pollutants on water quality, because aquatic macroinvertebrates, which basically means your aquatic insects and your aquatic worms, they're the best indicators that there are of water quality, because they live in the stream pretty much year-round. And even if you have a pollution event on one day out of the year, that event is going to be reflected in the diversity and the types of aquatic insects that you will find in the stream. So what we did was, we knew there was a new lead mine going in southern Utah on an Ozark headwater stream. So before the mine opened, we established sampling stations above and below the mine for aquatic macroinvertebrates. And pre-mine, both species had a very high diversity of species, or both stations had a very high diversity of species, including a full range of sensitive species. Post-mine upstream was still reflected a very, very high diversity and sensitive species, but downstream was a different story. There was an extensive growth of filamentous algae, and the diversity of species was greatly reduced, and the clean water species disappeared, and the pollution-tolerant species increased. Now, under the Missouri water pollution laws at the time, if there was a discharge that harmed aquatic life, that was a violation. So we had meetings with the company, talked to them about the water quality standards and about our findings, and that we had been monitoring it pre and post mine, what we had found, that we would continue to monitor, and that sometime we would be compelled, to go to court. If the pollution continued, we would have to be taking them to court. Not that we were eager to do that, but that was our responsibility. And we just needed a little more data. We wanted to have at least a year of post-mining data. And of course, they were kind of appalled. They felt they were doing their job. And they were doing a good job of getting the fines from the processing plant settled out. The water that was coming out of their discharge was clear. So to them, hey, we're doing a job. Why are you guys harassing us? But there were chemicals in the discharge water from their processes that they were not getting out. And so that was what was causing the nutrient enrichment and the filamentous algae and the disappearance of the clean water species. So we left the meeting and we continued to monitor it. And about 9 months later, the water quality started to improve, and then improved pretty dramatically, where within several months, the diversity of aquatic insects was as high in downstream areas as upstream areas, and all the sensitive species had returned. So we sent them a letter and said, hey, we've noticed a difference. What have you guys done? You know, you're no longer polluting the water down there. And they replied, and I talked with my contact in the company, and he says, we didn't want to tell you this because we didn't really trust you guys, but we went to a closed system, which eliminated all our discharge. And the company officials really weren't in favor of that. They felt it wasn't needed, but he had convinced them to do it. And that completely eliminated the problem. You know, they just recycled everything. They didn't discharge their waste into this headwater Ozark stream anymore. And the stream cleared up, the algae growth went away, all the sensitive organisms came back. And, you know, it's kind of how things should work. And I see a lot of similarities. I would expect some of the same things to happen, say in Walla Walla Creek, as happened in this headwater Ozark stream, if they go ahead and start discharging effluent to Walla Walla Creek.
Oh, well, thank you for sharing that story. I find that so fascinating. First off, that they got a baseline to start with. You were able to get a baseline, so you knew what to compare it with. That, to me, that's so important in an issue like this. Now, about the groundwater and private wells that are along the Walla Walla Creek, what do you think about those?
Yeah, that's an area of concern. I can see that would be concerning to the local residents. Well, let's see what we know. We know that streams are aquifer recharge areas. So anything that goes in a stream is going to ultimately go into the groundwater. So I don't think we can expect anything except additional pollution of groundwater with especially nitrates. And we know what the health benefits or what the health effects of that are. Excuse me. So I think we could expect additional nitrates in the groundwater, along probably with pathogens, insecticides, and antibiotics, which are all a part of the, you know, raising cattle with you know, and that comes out in the manure. It doesn't disappear. So we know from research that natural background levels of nitrogen in unpolluted water should be about 2 parts per million or lower. That's probably pretty safe. We know that at 5 parts per million, there's already well-documented adverse health effects. So I guess if anybody has over 2 parts per million of nitrates in their drinking water, I'd start to get worried. And if you have 5 parts per million, I'd start to get alarmed. And if you have 10 parts per million, that would be even worse. So I think basically that the DNR should require a study of water quality in the wells near the proposed site, and of course downstream from the proposed site before and afterwards. So as we talked about, you have that baseline. So that's kind of my thoughts on, you know, on the groundwater.
All right, thank you. That's very helpful. So going back to the Walla Walla, anglers are probably wondering how this would affect their fishing, or can I even eat the fish, or what are your thoughts about that kind of question?
Yeah, well, let's look at what we know. We know there's going to be a warm water discharge. That equals a negative. We know there's going to be adverse effects on stowflies, mayflies, caddisflies, and so forth. That equals a negative. We look at adverse effects on spawning habitat, which is we've already covered as a negative. The discharge of industrial effluent equals a negative. I think it's pretty safe to say the character of the stream could change or would change, and spawning success, fry survival, and growth rates could all be adversely affected. Now, would the fish be safe to eat? I think that's a question to be posed to the Department of Health Services, in my opinion. I know I would not personally want to eat fish from a stream receiving industrial discharge containing who knows what chemicals or what carcinogens. My advice would be that if Walla Walla Creek is your favorite trout stream, it would be a good idea to start looking for a new favorite trout stream in case this project is approved.
That's very sad, and I think the challenge is we don't know for sure what's getting discharged and if it's the same thing all the time. So
Yeah, we probably won't know.
Yeah.
Probably never tell us, and we won't know. It's a big unknown. It's the unknowns that are so scary, Kim.
Right. All right, well, let's talk about the probable effects of spreading the biogas slurry on farm fields as some kind of a fertilizer. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, okay, here. Before I start this, I'll have to say I have real life experience working with manure.
Me too.
My father grew up on a farm, and I have 3 uncles who were farmers most of their lives. I have shoveled manure out of the barn into a manure spreader for spreading in the pasture.
Right.
That's one of the jobs you get as a kid, I guess.
Yep, exactly.
Now, spreading biogas slurry on farm fields is scary to me on 2 fronts. And when I say scary, I mean scary with a capital S. First, we know that a portion of any slurry applied to the fields will end up in the nearest stream due to runoff, and will be further sources of pollution for both surface water and groundwater. So it just isn't the discharge that's going to be the source of pollution. It's going to be the runoff from spreading the what's left over after the manure digester processes the manure. I've said enough about that already. I won't delve into that any further. But the second thing that's really scary to me is that studies assessing the effects of applying biogas slurry to farm fields would be downright scary to me if I owned a farm and someone else wanted to use it for disposal of their waste products. Downright scary.
Mm-hmm.
For anyone out there considering using biogas slurry on their farm fields, you need to read a study published on October 14th, 2021 in Frontiers in Nutrition, which is available online from the National Library of Medicine at the National Center for Biotechnology Information. The study title is, quote, Comprehensive Risk Assessment of Applying Biogas Slurry in Peanut Cultivation. The findings are truly sobering. In a nutshell, that's supposed to be a little joke. In a nutshell,
Peanut nutshell.
The biogas slurry contained a high concentration of heavy metals. The heavy metals accumulated in the soil. The heavy metals were observed in the peanuts in concentrations that were a health hazard for human consumption. Let me repeat that. This is important. In a nutshell, the biogas slurry contained a high concentration of heavy metals. The heavy metals accumulated in the soil. The heavy metals were absorbed in the peanuts in concentrations that were a health hazard for human consumption. Now, that's scary.
Mm-hmm. Very scary.
This publication references two other publications that should sound an alarm to farmers, consumers, and to the Wisconsin Department of Health Services. And I'm going to read you a quote from those studies that appeared in this particular study that I've referenced. Here's the start of the quote. However, a large number of studies have shown that the long-term application of untreated biogas slurry to farmland would bring about crop failure with weak growth and poor quality. Moreover, the accumulation of heavy metals and antibiotic-resistant genes in soil and crops may be transferred to the human body via the food chain, affecting human health and potentially damaging organ functions. The overdose of trace elements such as copper, zinc, and lead, veterinary antibiotics, and other feed additives has contributed to such phenomena. End of quote. If that doesn't cause somebody to stop and think, I don't know what would. I'm going to actually read that again. Really think about this now. Quote, however, a large number of studies have shown that the long-term application of untreated biogas slurry to farmland would bring about crop failure with weak growth and poor quality. Moreover, the accumulation of heavy metals and antibiotic-resistant genes in soil and crops may be transferred to the human body via the food chain, affecting human health and potentially damaging organ functions. The overdose of trace elements such as copper, zinc, and lead, veterinary antibiotics, and other feed additives has contributed to such phenomena. You know, this is really scary stuff. And what this tells me is that if I am a landowner, that application of biogas slurry to my farm fields could very well end up rendering them unusable for growing crops. Wow.
I know, that's very scary, you know,
Very,
because
very scary.
a farmer's soil is his future. It's his retirement, you know, it's his lifeblood.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so
Soil is everything.
it is.
Soil and water are everything.
Right.
And this project doesn't look like it's going to help either one, of course.
Right. And my mother actually died from an antibiotic resistant infection, you know, septic shock.
Gosh.
So, I mean, this is real. This is stuff that happens to people every day. So,
you know.
Oh, let's see. Well,
let me go on just a little here
Okay.
with a few additional thoughts. Based on what we know, I would recommend asking for a comprehensive analysis and risk assessment of this proposed project from the Wisconsin Department of Health. I would want multiple officials in high places to certify that applying biogas slurry to farm fields from this manure digester would be safe for soil health, crop health, and human health based on a comprehensive analysis and risk assessment. In addition, I would want comprehensive ongoing monitoring as carried out in the study referenced previously. Nothing to fool around with here. This is bad. This is very risky.
Right. Well, what are your thoughts on this project in regard to the National Environmental Policy Act? Is there some suggestions you could give folks to think about?
Yeah, this is very important, I think. You know, based on the likely adverse impact of this proposed project and my 35 years of experience working with the National Environmental Policy Act, first with the Army Corps of Engineers, then with the Bureau of Land Management, and finally with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, I believe this proposal calls for the preparation of an environmental impact statement. No doubt about it. The basis for that is that issuing of a discharge permit under a federal program, even though the program administration has been delegated to the DNR, still constitutes a federal action. It's very important. There's a federal nexus here. The National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA, requires federal agencies to assess the environmental effects of their proposed actions prior to making decisions so as to protect the quality of the human environment. The discharge of industrial effluent into a Class 2 trout stream, the health hazards involved, and the high level of public controversy easily raised this proposed project to the level of an EIS, or environmental impact statement. Now, the EIS would be the responsibility of the EPA, or Environmental Protection Agency, but since they have delegated program administration to the DNR, they may delegate the actual drafting of an EIS to the DNR also. So that's exactly what this is exactly what an EIS is intended to do, is analyze the impacts and the threats of a project before a decision is made, before a lot of money is spent, and before a lot of people are put at risk. I mean, this is how things are supposed to work. If I was still working for the Army Corps of Engineers or the Bureau of Land Management or the Fish and Wildlife Service, there would be an EIS prepared on this without question. Wouldn't even be a consideration to do it or not.
Right. It's better to be proactive than reactive, and the precautionary principle, I think, applies here.
Yeah, I mean, these are real people's lives that are being intruded upon here. This is where people live. This is where home is. This is where their memories are.
Right.
This is a big deal. If this isn't an impact on the human environment, I don't know what is.
Right. So I know in Wisconsin, we hear a lot about the public trust doctrine. How might that be relevant in this proposal?
Yeah, well, I became very familiar with the public trust doctrine when I started to work for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. The public trust doctrine is the basis of the North American conservation model. You know, our founders decided that, unlike Europe, where fish, wildlife, and water were the property of individual landowners, in their new country, these resources would be owned collectively by all the people. That is why a landowner here does not own the deer on their property, does not own the fish in the stream that flows through their property, or the water in that stream. It's owned collectively by all the people. The public trust doctrine is a fundamental element of the Wisconsin Constitution. It establishes a trustee relationship where the state has responsibility to protect and manage water, fish, and wildlife for the benefit of the resource and the citizens of the state. This means the state has a legal obligation to protect and manage water and aquatic resources that belong to the citizens of Wisconsin for their legitimate uses, such as drinking water, fishing, boating, and swimming. Uses that diminish the quality or quantity of water and aquatic resources for these purposes would be in conflict with the public trust doctrine and the Wisconsin Constitution. This responsibility has largely been delegated by the legislature to the Department of Natural Resources. Now, let me repeat that because this is really important. The public trust doctrine is a fundamental element of the Wisconsin Constitution. It establishes a trustee relationship where the state has responsibility to protect and manage water, fish, and wildlife for the benefit of the resource and the citizens of the state. This means the state has a legal obligation to protect and manage water and aquatic resources that belong to the citizens of Wisconsin for legitimate uses such as drinking water, fishing, boating, and swimming. Uses that diminish the quality or quantity of water and aquatic resources for these purposes would be in conflict with the public trust doctrine and the Wisconsin Constitution. This responsibility has largely been delegated by the legislature to the Department of Natural Resources. Given the nature and expected adverse impacts from this proposed project, I do not see how any reasonable and prudent person could conclude this project would be approvable under the public trust doctrine and the Wisconsin Constitution. Excuse me here. If the DNR believes this project is approvable, I believe they should meet with the citizens of Lynn Township and explain how that can possibly be.
I would agree. There needs to be a really hard look at this. Well, Bud, we just thank you so much for all your perspective and your experience. It's been so helpful to listen to your stories, real world stories. It's always good to hear those instead of a bunch of theories. We got some real world evidence from you today.
Yeah, okay. Glad to do it.
Yes, well, thank you so much. And folks, thank you for listening, for your time. We appreciate your attention to this matter, and let us know if you've got questions. Thank you and goodbye.